my briefcase. Oh, not here. See how
Well,
much tap dancing I can.
there you
There you
go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin this meeting of the Bowling Green City Council Finance Committee. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to receiving a report tonight from our finance director, a wrap up 2021. That'll be interesting. We're continuing a process we started about 2 years ago, and I think it's been very beneficial to have these quarterly reports. And also tonight, a bit later in the agenda, we'll be hearing from our Director of Economic Development, Katie Thompson. She has a presentation for us as well. So without any further ado, unless my colleagues have any.
I have no ado.
Very good.
Or further.
Dana?
Thank you. Good evening. Well, like they say, no news is good news, I guess. My reports get shorter and shorter, but this is just to give you a broad view of where we ended the year. And as I mentioned at the last Finance Committee meeting, I wanted to put some more city activity into it. So I did the year end kind of broken down into our fund types, so you can see a broader picture of the city. We are going to do a summary of the activity, cash position, look at income tax, and then what we have going into the second quarter.
Okay.
Throughout the first quarter. So, all righty. So this is a broad summary by revenue type, and just keep in mind that it's a cash basis because it includes after we approve the original budget and then we carry over the encumbrances. So that's why that difference is so much more. We knew in the general fund that we passed it with the use of fund balance, but it wasn't that big in the original budget. That's just what happens when the encumbrances carry over. Couple of the other types of funds, we had the same type of budget differences. And just for everybody, the general fund is the major operating fund of the city. All the fund types are they're classified based on their revenue source and what the revenues can be used for. So general fund is the main fund, and it can do just about anything. Special revenue, they're based on types of revenue like levy, where the revenue can only be used for specific things. Capital funds are funds set aside or designated for capital purchases. And enterprise funds are those ones that function like a business. So, of course, all of our utilities, they're backed by user charges, and that's how those classifications come into play. It's not something that we just say, this is what this is going to be. So, but you can see by the actual activity that none of those types of funds overall did we have to go into fund balances. The revenues ended up being more than the expenditures, which is good news. And then I gave you the encumbered column because, again, some of that will carry over, and we can only assume that, at least a portion of it's going to be spent. So it's just a good kind of identifier to have. But even with those figured in, none of them had a deficit balance. So overall, there's really no material concerns from a budget standpoint. You do have in your packet tonight the final supplemental request, and there's quite a few of those, but they're really by line item. No increases, just one increase for an advance that we have to do. So, and moving on, this is a visual of that same chart that kind of shows you the bulk of our activity and the differences in you can see the revenue and expenditures, but then you can really get a sense there of how much of our activity is in our enterprise funds based on our, all of our special revenue and capital combined. So just a visual. And this is our cash position. So again, by those fund types, I broke it down a little bit more and put in debt service in there. That usually ends up being an in and out because we transfer other funds throughout the year into that to pay those debt service payments. So it generally ends every year between 30 and 50,000, just like a holding place. And it also shows you the cash position by fund type, by percentage. And just note that these are, again, those fund types all have limitations to what we can use them on. The only one that really doesn't have a limitation is the general fund. So I always like to, you see that big number, like, wow, look at what we're doing, how much we have, but it is limited. So just keep that in mind. And then in respect to the budget we passed, it's overall in excess of 100 million. So. Any questions so far? Okay, moving on to income tax, because, it affects us citywide, one way or another. We started our year with a $21 million estimate, and you can see we ended well in excess of that. We did increase our estimate at the end of 2021 to 22 million, but we still finished in excess of that. And the month to month, that's just a broken down kind of cash flow. In the end, it was more than we estimated. So each month we just kind of monitored it. And the next page just kind of shows you a trend of our collections. We have a lot of discussion about 2020 collections, and it was so low, and then this year was just so high. Just based on this trend line, it's, they kind of evened each other out. And where we ended this year is a good indicator that, we'll hit our estimate of for 2022 of 22.4 million. It's still pretty conservative, but it just kind of shows you where that line's going. I also wanted to add in here, this is our historical trend for our refunds. And we talked about it. I mean, it's the one thing we really don't know for this year. And we talked about it during the budget process that we put such a high number in that refund. The state has ruled that working from home people can apply for a refund if they paid a city that, if they worked in Bowling Green, if their home office is in Bowling Green, but they work from home, their employer withheld and gave us the withholdings. That was kind of on a stay during 2020. Like, yeah, the cities are still going to keep their money. We're going to leave everything like it is. The state did rule as of right now that for 2020 and 2021, people will be able to request a refund. And the unknown for us is we don't know where that falls yet. So we put a number in there. I don't anticipate it being that high, but I just wanted to point it out again, should something that I'm unaware of happen. But you can see it's a lot higher than the trend. Questions? And then for first quarter 2022, not really expecting any cash flow issues. A lot of our large things like property tax comes in, and we pay some of our debt service that primarily a lot of those are in the second and third quarter. We're preparing for the 21 audit. We're getting ready to officially close the books and roll up all those reports. Moving forward with budgeted capital items after all the legislation's in place. And we should start seeing some new expenses related to the city building project as that demolition's going to start. And so we'll start spending some of those funds. And that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
You see any red flags? It didn't sound like it in the presentation.
I really don't. Each month I'm here, I get more information, but I really haven't seen anything. The only thing I'm really watching is the refund.
Thank you.
And would that be a refund of all of for a given month if someone worked?
Yeah, it could be
Oh,
for the
well.
whole year.
Or any portion.
Yeah, I believe we've had the final rule, but you never know. And the other thing is that, if somebody lives in Perrysburg, worked from home, got withheld for Bowling Green, they're going to ask us for a refund. They're going to have to turn around and give it to Perrysburg because they worked in Perrysburg. So it's kind of a, who knows what people will do. Some people might say, well, for $12 I'm going to gain, I'm just going to leave it where it's at. Or somebody might say, oh, I want it to go to my home. That's the unknown of it, what people are going to do based on what they're allowed to do.
Probably sorting through that for years.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately. Now, does the overage above the income tax that's above the actual 1.2 million, does that approximate what you're anticipating pulling out of cash? Doesn't that? I'm trying to recall the.
It was
Didn't we have a
$1 million.
number close to that in the
It was $1 million out of the general fund
$1 million out of the general
deficit.
fund?
So it's actually higher. It came in higher.
Well, goes down as a positive here.
Yep.
I mean, all things considered, pending refund.
Pending refund.
Questions, Mark?
I don't have anything. I mean, taxes, I know one of the problems we've had over the past couple of years since COVID is the delay in taxes. This year, we're expecting things to be normal, right? So,
I think they're evening out, and I think I haven't heard of any changed due dates as far as that goes. But I think that's why you saw those variances in those month to month,
right.
and hopefully, yeah, we are expecting it to even out some.
I mean, there's no sign.
No,
But it's only Tuesday.
That it is. Yes. Well, thank you very much.
thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. Also, we've invited Katie Thompson here from Economic Development. She's got a presentation and an opportunity for us to consider a replacement document for our economic development section of the master plan. So, on up.
Right. Hi, everyone.
Evening.
If I don't know you, I'm Katie Thompson with Bowling Green Economic Development, I'm director of that organization. And let me just get myself situated here. Okay, so I was made aware that council had discussed updating the economic development plan. And that is a section of the city's comprehensive plan. So that current plan was written in the 80s. It looked like some modifications in the 90s. So I have that here. I don't know if any of you have read through this, but this is what we're currently working off of. And in talking with Greg, he kind of brought up that plan and the fact that there had been discussion of updating it. And so asked my thoughts on that. And I just simply offered to write a draft because this is the world that I live in on the day-to-day basis. So I did go ahead and write a draft, and I brought a copy for everybody. The purpose of this is to potentially replace the outdated draft if you see that it should. But at the very least, it could be some thoughts for you to consider. So I will go. There's enough there for you all, and then whoever else around here that might want one.
Anybody? Let that other folks have a copy.
This is
Yeah, it is. Oh, you can pass these out too. They brought their. I gave read aheads to these.
Okay,
gentlemen, so-
perfect. The only thing that's changed, just a few grammatical things that I fixed.
I think I waited to get that to send it to already.
Oh, okay.
Same day that you sent me the correction.
Okay, great.
They're only commas.
So
on-
the first thing that I want to point out is you'll notice this is one page. which is very short compared to the current document. And there's some reasons for that that I want to make sure I explain. So the first is that just an acknowledgement that our world changes very quickly with the pace of technology and the changes in our society. Everything changes very, very rapidly. So in my mind, it seems that a plan should consist of more of the high level overarching goals as opposed to a lot of the small action items, because unless the intent is to update that plan on an annual basis, it could get outdated really, really easily. So that is why it's shorter. I also, like I mentioned, focused on those overarching goals that maybe should be the kind of overriding focus of those economic development efforts in our community. The actionable steps will change from year to year as those with boots on the ground kind of understand the national and regional trends, assess our local needs, and make decisions accordingly. And then I will also point out in here that I did include a nod to the other city planning documents, because rather than include all of that information in this plan, to me, it would just make sense to ensure that we reference using the other city planning documents and departments in conjunction with the economic development plan rather than repeating information within this plan. So I'll kind of go over some of the highlights, but that is why it's so much shorter. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but just want to point out a couple of key points. One is that as a key driver of income tax revenue and capital investment, the city of BG obviously seeks a comprehensive yet nimble approach to economic development. And that is achieved through the public-private partnership with Bowling Green Economic Development. I'm happy to explain how that works, but I think most of you are familiar with that. So Bowling Green Economic Development is the partnering organization that kind of handles those economic developments on behalf of the city of Bowling Green and its larger base of trustees. So as you kind of move down to the section in the middle where it talks about 4 strategic economic development goals, those were not just kind of developed out of my own head one day. The timing has been really good because our organization actually went through an in-depth strategic planning process throughout 2021, and that engaged our broad base of trustees. So there are over 50 trustees, you could also call them members of our organization, that represent all different areas of our community. So all different kinds of professional services, a lot of the manufacturers, a lot of the city administration. So there was broad participation in that, and that's how we arrived at these goals. So I think it's also safe to say that it pretty confidently reflects the overall position of the community. Do you want me to go through these, or did everyone kind of get to read that?
Well,
in
I know the
advance?
committee's had a chance to read this. They've had it for over a week. Anything else you want to highlight?
Okay.
Just to,
So I won't go ahead and read them word for word since you've done that. The other thing then that I thought was important to include at the bottom is kind of our primary base of activities that we want to conduct on a regular basis. Again, broad enough to make sure that we are fully capturing the work that needs to be done, but not so narrow and so focused that it's outdated in a year. So I have this before you and figure that you can do with it as you please. It could be as easy, I suppose, as presenting it at council. And I think, I don't know, you guys know how the process works, but maybe just adopting it and replacing it, or simply use this as a basis for your discussion. But I'm available to help with whatever you decide. And if you need any more insight into the work that we're doing on a daily basis and how that's maybe reflected in this document, happy to answer questions.
I want to ask you to answer that question I'd asked you previously, because others may have the same one. And at the last bullet, supporting placemaking initiatives, I wasn't clear to me about placemaking. Explain that term.
Yeah.
That was the one thing that I'm like, I have no idea
Right.
what
Well, I
this
had the same
is.
question, and Katie's got a good answer.
I actually
Yeah.
used that internet thingy to look it up.
Yeah. So it's basically the modern term for quality of life. So giving people a sense of place, you could call it a sense of community. So you could more broadly categorize that as kind of those community development efforts that create that strong sense of place, quality of life that when an employer is looking at, selecting a location and they get through all the logistical things, they look at, are we going to be able to support a workforce here? Do people feel that there's a good quality of life in this community? So we want to be engaged in those efforts to make sure that we're doing those things. Any other questions?
I'd like to thank you for going through this. It's much harder to write a 1-page document than a 4-page document. So,
Yes.
Or 14.
Yes.
14.
All right.
And I do want to emphasize that that existing document was originally appears from the record to be drafted in 87 with a minor update in 1997. So it's desperately a review. I know Rachel brought it up at our planning meeting, who pointed it out as an antiquated document that needed addressed.
And
Although it didn't make our official list, it's something that I think, big scheme of things, is easy to do. Doesn't cost us any city funds. Great step in the right direction to update that document. And if anybody's curious about the current document, it is available on the city website. There is a link to it when you go into the comprehensive plan on the planning department's part of the webpage. So if anybody's curious, that original document is available, downloadable.
Mr. Chair, I feel compelled to clarify that some people have seen my previous work and have seen that I don't achieve the goal of brevity. And I was on council during the time that the draft was put together, the 1987 draft, and I just want to make it clear, I'm not the cause of it being 14 pages.
So they shortened your original.
Mark, any?
I don't have any questions. No, I mean, it seems like the primary purpose of this is to be flexible, not necessarily to provide answers, but to provide a framework of how to get where we want to go.
It's the strategic view of where we go.
And our zoning code and our land use plans and all of those other documents really inform more of the nitty gritty of what we
Right.
can accomplish and where it should be accomplished. Whereas this provides more of the, like you're saying, the overarching view.
And now that I know what placemaking initiatives are, I'm all set.
All right.
Thank you. Well, go ahead.
Thanks.
So, and I think that I like the fact that this is a 1-page document. It's something that can be easily reviewed annually or every other year, depending on what council wants. Very easily determined whether it needs to be amended, with the ongoing help of our economic development downtown. So what I would recommend is, if this meets approval of fair committee, that we ask properly formatted. I suspect it would be attached to some kind of resolution brought forward for consideration by the whole council. I mean, to adopt this as a replacement document, I think the vehicle, we can ask Mike when he gets here later. I think the vehicle to move this from a draft to a replacement document in the comprehensive plan, a cover sheet. That's irrelevant. They'll know the right mechanism. What I'm suggesting we do here is vote on moving that through Mr. Marsh, packaging it so that at a future meeting, we can, our council, consider this document.
I think that's a good idea. I myself humbly submit that since we all had to look up or get clarification on placemaking and the definition, and again, I didn't look at multiple definitions. Like the first one I found was a bit more targeted than quality of life. So if Katie doesn't mind substituting in place of placemaking quality of life initiatives, that will prevent it'll focus what's meant by that.
Actually, I'd rather see us hold up on any changes till we get the full council, because there may be.
Oh.
I mean, we're going to consider. What I'm suggesting is we push it to council. There'll be an opportunity for the entire council to discuss, even bring Katie back for questions that Yeah, everything's on the table, like any proposed piece of legislation when we get it. But again, I'm inclined to defer to the expert. Like he's offered to draft. There's nobody better qualified to answer. Development. Executive Director of Economic Development. So I think it all came out win. I'll formally move that as a committee we vote to move this to council.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a majority, so we'll do that. Talk to Ray about this package and at a future meeting. I'm sure we can get that done in 2 meetings. Full council president. I'm up. Very good. And the only other item we often address here is everyone got in advance a read, as we have in the past, quarterly updated quarterly update from our state facility director. And typically we offer this opportunity for members to answer questions. I don't have questions. But does anybody have any questions on that packet that was mailed last week,
I don't.
quarterly? And I appreciate that. Those are valuable reports. I like getting them. I think all of council. It's educational for parents. Okay, well, there are no questions on sustainability report, refuse recycling report. All this adjourned. Thank you very much.
Amanda, can you send me
This
the
is-
report?